right, today it is my great pleasure to be interviewing Rowan Jacobsen, author of the soon-to-be published book, In Defense of Sunlight. And Rowan, thanks so much for joining me today. You sent me a link to the publisher's website for the book. It's Simon & Schuster. And I read the title, In Defense of Sunlight. And I read the little catchphrase, which was, get sun, not too much. Go outside. And I thought, oh, that's like a homage to In Defense of Food, Michael Pollan's book. And then, which is eat food, mostly plants, not too much. And I saw in the foreword to your book, which you kindly sent me a PDF version of, that homage was actually very, very intentional. So I wanted to start there because there's an analogy between Michael Pollan's book and your book. And could you explain what that analogy is?
Yeah, you're right. First of all, thanks for having me, Robin. And yes, you're right. It was very intentional because I wanted people to start thinking about light as the other nutrient, the one that we've sort of forgotten about. And in Pollan's book, what he did, and I think In Defense of Food was written close to 20 years ago now. And what he did was question that sort of era of nutritionism of the 1980s and 1990s, where we stopped thinking about whole foods and started just thinking about carbs and proteins and fats, and we had learned,
and vitamins and minerals.
Exactly. Yeah. We had learned, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and we had a little knowledge on nutrition, and we kind of forgot the bigger picture. And the experts started giving us what turned out to be really bad advice based on just a little tiny bit of science, so we ended up eating a whole lot of sugar, a whole lot of carbs, and forgot that things like olive oil could be good for us.
And also forgot to eat food, actual food.
So that was Pollan's 7 words were eat food, not too much.
Mostly plants.
Eat food, mostly plants. Yeah, not too much, mostly plants. And his big thing was don't eat anything your great grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. So he was sort of calling on that evolutionary knowledge, that common ancestral wisdom, as sort of like a way to make decisions about, like, don't trust anything that appeared yesterday in the diet. And I think all of that reasoning applies equally well to light. What did our ancestors do? Why might they have evolved this way? And if we're doing things today that are extremely different than what they are doing, do we have good reason for doing that, good evidence? Or again, did a little learning send us in the wrong direction?
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. And so in the book, you cover so many things in the book. It's just amazing. Everyone, go and pre-order it, please. Pre-order it from Simon & Schuster. It's going to be available soon. It's well worth it. I can't say I've read every word. I read the first few chapters word for word, and then I kind of skim read the rest of it just to extract all the juicy bits so that we could talk today. But so okay, you trace the evolutionary association, let's say, between humans and sunlight. So humans developing in Africa, originating as hairy apes, and then shedding our hair, and then we've got this direct contact between the big flaming ball in the sky and our skin. And so that's a fascinating story in itself. Say more about that and what you learned as you dug into that story of how humans became, the naked ape.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange story because, before we split apart from chimpanzees and the other apes, we were covered in fur. We lived in a forest setting. We probably didn't get that much sunlight. We got a lot of very indirect sunlight, but very little direct. And then, the arc of human evolution involved several really large, important changes that kind of happened in relatively the same period. We got much better at walking and running, right? So we were no longer a tree species. We became very good at moving around on the ground. Our diet must have changed because our jaws changed, Nice.
Sorry, I'm just being attacked by my dog, and so I'm just going to bring him up here so that he stops jumping on my back. Go ahead.
What's his name?
His name is Tonka. Yeah, he's a Staffy Rottweiler cross, and he likes getting attention. But go ahead. I'll put him down in a minute.
So we evolved jaws that were evolved for eating meat. So we were probably getting better at catching prey. And we left the forest for a more savanna-like environment, although we probably were going back and forth. And back right then, when we actually would have been getting a whole lot more sun exposure, and not just any sun exposure, tropical sun exposure, very intense sun for 12 hours a day, we also lost all of our fur. And it seems like a really strange evolutionary move to suddenly expose your skin to all that light radiation, unless there was a really good reason to do that. And there's still theories about why that might have happened. But sort of the dominant theory that most people ascribe to right now is that it had to do with cooling off the body. We have about 10 times as many sweat glands as a chimp, or as anything else. We sweat like pretty much no other creature. It's really unusual, and because of that, we are able to dump a lot of heat, which means that our metabolism and our active metabolism can run hot. We can basically just run our engines hot for a long time compared to most other species, which need to rest, especially if they're in the tropics. They need to rest after a period of activity.
Yeah, this being the origin of the persistence hunting theory that Christopher McDougall elaborates on in Born to Run. Yeah, that humans became the naked ape who could sweat a lot, and that allowed us to pursue this persistence hunting strategies. Really interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but the downside was so in order to sweat that much, we had to lose our fur, which would have otherwise gotten in the way. But the downside was then all our skin was exposed to all that light radiation. So in order not to get fried, we had to adapt. And that was when we started producing a lot of melanin, and all humans back then had quite dark skin.
Yes.
And it was only, so the dark skin is an adaptation to that environment. And it allowed us to thrive in that environment. We had no problems getting 12 hours of tropical sun a day back then. In fact, we evolved to really rely on it. And then only much later, as human populations migrated toward the poles and got much less light, and we're probably starting to wear clothing, that our skin got lighter in those situations, probably because we weren't getting enough light. So the lightness of the skin was an adaptation to try to maximize whatever sunlight you could get.
Yeah, you also mentioned in the book that there were multiple mutations in different human populations in different locations that resulted in that lightening of the skin, the loss of melanin, or the formation of different, not different forms of melanin, but different ways that melanin concentrated. And so this speaks volumes about this being a really highly adaptive strategy for humans who are moving out from that tropical region and into higher latitudes. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. It happened several times, which means in different ways, which means that's a good sign that, if these different populations were hitting on the same evolutionary strategy, that it was clearly advantageous. Even Neanderthals, looks like Neanderthals, at least some of them were redheads.
Redheaded Neanderthals. Yeah, it just doesn't fit the image that we see in the paintings in the history books.
Yeah.
So one of the other really, really interesting sections of your book, to my mind anyway, was where you trace this evolution of medical attitudes towards sunlight. And so you have this section in the book devoted to heliotherapy, right? To the very, very conscious and deliberate use of sunshine exposure as therapy for rickets, for tuberculosis, and eventually, the way that you write it, it's like it was being framed as a cure for everything. And this kind of peaked in California in the 1920s. And I could you tell the story of the Lovell Health House? That just blew me away.
Yeah, I was just there recently. It's very famous house. But yeah, this was one of the things that really surprised me when I dug into the research for my book. Like we all grew up in an era where the sun was considered a problem, and we were taught to be very careful about it and to avoid, especially down in Australia, you all were really taught even before us to be wary of the sun. So we're used to assuming that that's the norm. But when you look back into the historical records, 100+ years ago, it was exactly the reverse. People did not have even questioned the idea that the sun was extremely good for you. In fact, they, like you said, they started to believe that it could almost cure everything, and that was because it had cured it was found to be really helpful for rickets and tuberculosis. And then from there, people started thinking, oh, well, maybe it cures a whole lot of stuff. And that was that whole sanitarium era. Like people started going to sunny places up into the mountains or to, desert climates like California, seeking the sun as a way to heal from tuberculosis, or actually after a while, it just became to heal from anything. And it was almost like a sun cult in a sense. And of course, it peaked in Southern California because that's, if you like the sun and you like avocados, you like California has all the things you need. So back much earlier than we realized, even in the 19-teens, there were vegan restaurants in Los Angeles, which was really surprising to me. Like it did not start with the hippies.
Surprising. Yeah, that was well pre-hippie. Yeah. And so some of those early pioneers like Kellogg were actually proponents of heliotherapy too. It wasn't just eat my cornflakes. It was go and get some sun. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was great. And it was the medical authorities. It wasn't even fringe. The U.S. government put out a pamphlet called Sunlight for Babies that was trying to educate all families to learn that they had to make sure their children got some sunlight. So this was very mainstream. And you asked about the Lovell Health House.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, I remember reading advice given to English nannies that they should place their charges' prams in dappled shade, right? Yeah. So this was totally common knowledge. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Lovell, the Lovell Health House.
Pretty good advice again, actually. The dappled shade, it looks like that, they were onto something. But totally. So the guy who was the health columnist for the Los Angeles Times in the 1920s was a guy named Philip Lovell, and he was a naturopath, and he was a huge fan of sunbathing. He was vegetarian, and he was a big fan of exercise and sunbathing before either of those things was popular. But he definitely preached the joys of nude sunbathing to everyone in Los Angeles, and to demonstrate what that would look like. He had a house built by an architect named Richard Neutra, who became one of the most famous architects of modernism, and especially California modernism. But this was Neutra's first serious commission. And so he had him build quite an amazing house that's up in the hills above Los Angeles near Griffith Park. And it was like no other house that had ever been built at the time. It was kind of built into a hillside, and it floated above the hillside and had massive glass windows everywhere at a time when no houses had that. And flat roofs and flat decks everywhere for sunbathing. And Lovell actually invited the entire city of Los Angeles after the house was built to come up and check it out. And they did. So thousands of cars left Los Angeles and drove up into the hills to do this open house of his house. And the idea was that everybody would start having these houses and would get as much outside time as possible. And they did. There was that huge trend of what we think of as sort of that California modernist look of glass houses with flat roofs. And we think they look cool, or we think they look very sort of 1950s. But what's been forgotten is that whole design was for health. Like, it came out of a strategy for maximizing light and fresh air for human beings.
In the 1920s, it's quite mind-blowing, isn't it? You know, the distorted picture that we have of people from generations past. And you sort of, I mean, I know that was also the era of the flappers and so forth, but we kind of think of them as being a lot more uptight. I love your descriptions of the this sun culture that developed in Germany, where you'd have entire German families going out to parks and just, you know, exercising butt naked. And all these, you know, naked sunbathers along the riverside in Moscow, but it never really caught on in England because they're too uptight. That just made me laugh.
Yeah, the Germans, they are the nakedest people on the planet for a long time, still are. But yeah, England, it was always a tough sell, you know.
There's actually I don't know if I should mention this or not, but there is a nudist retreat, resort, something or other. It's down the road from me. In fact, I was just walking my dogs down there this morning. It's all very discreet. And look, the thing is, I live in the subtropics, right? Like, there are serious dangers to being out in the Queensland sun without anything on. So I don't know. I can see it being a good idea in Germany, where they just don't get enough sun, but around here, not so much. Not so much. Which brings me to another, to me, very fascinating part of the book, which is living in Queensland as I do. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Sydney. I've been in Queensland about 7 years. And Queensland, as you probably know, is the melanoma capital of the world.
Yeah.
Where Australia is also, as you mentioned before, the country that launched Slip, Slop, Slap, the first, you know, sun hazard awareness campaign in 1980. Now, I was 9 years old at the time, and I've got to tell you, I completely ignored it, and so did all my friends. No, I lived in a suburb, it was a couple of suburbs away from the beach, and having a tan was really cool. And the only sunscreen that I ever used was a copper tone with an SPF of 4. So it was basically, you just put cooking oil on yourself so that you'd get a better tan. So, but then when my kids were born, they went to schools where it was like no hat, no play, and the school wanted to put sunscreen on my kids, and I wasn't keen on the idea. Anyway, so we've got this really interesting paradox where Australia led the world in promoting sun awareness, and yet we still have this galloping high rate of melanoma. Of diagnosis, by the way, it's actually not a leading cause of cancer death or death overall. Say more about the paradox of melanoma.
Yeah, well, so that's a really important point to unpack. Australia and New Zealand have much higher rates of melanoma incidence than anywhere else in the world, and that's because there's a mismatch. You have a population that was really adapted to the British Isles largely, one of the lowest sun places on Earth, living in one of the highest sun places on Earth. So there's definitely that Slip Slop Slap campaign, that was all a good idea. Like, those of us who came out of the 70s and 80s with a cavalier attitude toward sun exposure probably did need a little bit of like stiff, strong medicine. But the funny thing about melanoma is that, as you said, it's actually not a significant cause of death, and it's people can be really surprised because the institutions whose job it is to prevent melanoma, they do a very good job and what they do, and they have a lot of funding to do it. So we hear a lot about avoiding melanoma, and we often hear that how common skin cancer is, and we tend to conflate the two. But what most people don't realize is that there are several types of skin cancer. The big three are melanoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and basal cell carcinoma. And melanoma only accounts for maybe 2% of those skin cancer cases. It's not the common one. The super common ones are squamous cell carcinoma and basal cell carcinoma, which I imagine a third of the people in Australia probably wind up with those by the time they're 80 or 85.
common as muck. Absolutely, and especially in Queensland. Yeah.
Right,
People getting these SCCs and BCCs cut off their faces, their ears, and so forth every day of the week. Yeah, right. Totally.
And it's certainly no fun to get those things cut off. Nobody wants to go through that. But it is very unusual for those to have for additional health issues down the line. You just cut them off and they're done. They don't become invasive and they don't spread to any of your internal organs, except under very, very rare conditions. Melanoma is the much more aggressive one of the three, but as we said, it's only maybe 1 or 2% of skin cancers. Hang on, I got to turn my soup down.
Okay.
I'm staying at a friend's cabin, and various people are coming for dinner, and I got tasked with making nettle soup. So I was picking nettles earlier today. And
nettle soup, wow, that's fantastic. I've never made it.
It's my favorite green, you only get them in the spring, when they first come up everywhere.
Yes, and that's a whole other piece of the melanoma story, isn't it? The dietary factor. We'll come back to that.
Yes,
sorry,
absolutely.
Don't want to drag you off.
Melanoma, you don't want to get melanoma. That's the one that can get invasive. And the survival rates. If you do get invasive melanoma, the survival rates are not good. But it's not very common. And so worldwide, melanoma is responsible for about 60,000 deaths a year worldwide, and probably Australia is a significant number of those. I don't know exactly how many.
Yes, I actually looked this up last night. I think it's about 1,400 deaths a year from melanoma.
So that's really nothing in the greater picture. Worldwide,
in a population of 26 million people.
Yeah,
it's a fraction of our cardiovascular death rate.
Yeah. So worldwide, you've got 20 million people a year dying from cardiovascular disease, a few more million from diabetes, other internal cancers, 10 million. So those are the big diseases that if you want to improve public health, you want to take a shot at those. Changing melanoma a little bit up or down isn't going to make any difference in the bigger picture. And obviously, we'd love to make it go away entirely.
Yes. And not to dismiss those, say, 1,400 deaths a year. I mean, look, it is an awful disease. It's a terrible death. The point is, it's a small drop in the bucket. And the diseases that you mentioned, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and so forth, you're not mentioning those idly, because it turns out that more sunlight exposure actually decreases the incidence and the mortality from those very diseases. Exactly. So we've had this amazing campaign to try to reduce melanoma incidence, which it actually hasn't been that successful at, for, again, reasons that we'll discuss further. But even if it was successful at lowering melanoma rates, what if the cost of that is actually increasing people's risk of cardiovascular disease because they're now treating the sun as their enemy and not getting outside?
And that's exactly what, about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, researchers in other fields began asking that question. They would notice clear indicators that people were suffering higher rates of the diseases that they specialized in places where they got less sun, and that there was enough mechanistic evidence in the lab to sort of point in the direction of more sunlight reducing these diseases, big diseases that are responsible for many, many deaths. So they started asking uncomfortable questions about whether we had gone too far with the sun avoidance campaign, and did we need to pull it back? And those questions really never made it beyond these specialties of medical research. The general public did not have that conversation because the authorities were not ready to have that conversation. But from the work you've done, that very often science doesn't necessarily translate into the public sphere of awareness. So part of the reason I wrote the book was to really round up all this information we had and talk to the scientists who were asking these questions and try to make the case that we need to rethink some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the response that many of these scientists got, I think Richard Weller, the dermatologist, he's originally from the UK or from, he's British, but works in Glasgow,
British.
right?
He did some work in Australia, but most of his career has been in Scotland.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's at
Which has significantly higher cardiovascular death rates and just general, you might say, degenerative disease morbidity than the UK. And it isn't fully explained by higher rates of smoking or drinking or obesity or sedentary lifestyle or whatever. There is a huge sunlight gradient. So I noted in your book that there's really only one journal related to dermatology that Richard Weller actually publishes in, even though he's a dermatologist. And instead, his work shows up in journals devoted to, kidneys and heart and epidemiology and all this other stuff. Because, well, what has been the response of dermatologists to what Richard Weller is discovering and attempting to report?
So they don't want to hear it. They're not ready to consider this idea that we might need to modify our sun messaging. It's a very inconvenient subject for them because they've spent decades trying to hammer home this message to everyone that zero sun is the proper amount of sun, and they've done that partly because when you're doing a message for the entire general public, you have to make it very simple, hard to misunderstand. So they have probably, because of that, gone too far, and in their effort to make it clear and understandable and simple, have lost some of the truth and nuance along the way. But we need to we need to look at the facts and try to be more, sort of have a more sophisticated take on it. And so, so Weller dermatologists have not generally been responsive to this message. They also, if you've been preaching a message for 20 or 30 years in your own practice, to suddenly have to say, well, actually, maybe not, not everybody wants to do that.
Yes, indeed. I think look, I'm sure that characterizes pretty much every profession, but medicine and public health do seem to be very resistant to changing course on any subject. And I mean, I can tell you, every dermatologist of my acquaintance is preaching this message that you should not get any sunlight on your skin. The conventional wisdom is still that if you have a tan, that's skin damage, right? A tan and skin damage are one and the same thing. And so you should not be aiming to get a tan by any means. And so one of the things, again, there's so many interesting nuggets that I pulled out of your book. You mentioned, for instance, that the skin microbiome actually acts as a sunscreen, that there are bacteria which say, as you're coming out of winter, you don't have so many of these bacteria in your skin microbiome, but as the intensity of the sun increases and your duration of exposure increases, these bacteria multiply, and these bacteria actually absorb ultraviolet light and use it for bacteria things. God knows what they're doing. They're just using it for their metabolism, basically. But they act as a living sunscreen. I mean, that's pretty fascinating. And so what happens to people who don't get any sun exposure at all, or the only sun exposure that they have is they're essentially blanketed in sunscreen? What happens to their microbiome, their skin microbiome?
Right, they're going to have a completely different microbiome, different population of microbes living on their skin compared to somebody who is getting regular sunlight. So yeah, you can grow a healthy microbiome that is going to help you deal with solar radiation. And again, if we think about it from an evolutionary perspective, that was what we always had until the modern era. In fact, we mentioned before how human beings sweat a lot. That sweat is like prime food for some of the microbes that like to live on skin that actually help protect it from solar radiation. So back in the day, when we also weren't taking showers and putting various chemicals on our skin, we would have definitely had a flourishing, an abundant natural population of microbes living on our skin that took some of that brunt of that sunlight away from us, so that whatever did pass into our skin was much easier to deal with. And then we also would have had a lot more melanin in our skin back then. So that's why we could easily endure 12 hours of tropical sunlight a day back then.
Totally. Something that fair-skinned people should definitely not try. Okay.
Yeah,
and
even fair-skinned people can, you can definitely build up it's sometimes referred to as a solar callus on social media, and not everybody likes that word. Dermatologists don't like the idea that you can develop a solar callus, but you can definitely curate a very successful natural sun defense between a little bit of tan, a little bit of microbes, and the part that's often missed is the damage repair systems in our skin. And when
more about that, I loved that bit. Yeah.
I actually think so. This is a really important thing for people to think of with all disease. I think as we go forward, as medicine evolves, we're going to pay a little bit less attention to inputs, like what are the best inputs to keep us healthy, and more attention to how do we keep our damage repair systems in top shape so that they can fix the damage that turns into aging. Because we all, important discovery started about 20 years ago is that we do have these damage repair systems in all of our cells that can fix DNA damage, that can fix any kind of molecular damage. And every day they do that, especially when we're sleeping, when we're sort of offline at night, all the daily damage that accumulated is getting fixed or just like eliminated and taken out with the trash. And that's what keeps us in really good shape. And just like any other system in the body, it gets better with practice. So if and this is a concept known as hormesis, which turns up in lots of different places. I'm sure you know a lot about it. But,
whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah, exactly. And it's an old concept. It again turns out to have been correct. And just a little bit of testing of all of our systems on a daily basis, not too much, but a little bit of testing helps keep them in tip-top shape, and that's what sort of keeps aging at bay. So I kind of think of sunlight as a type of exercise. It's exercise for our skin, and just like with exercise for our body, you don't want to do none. You don't want to be a couch potato, but you also don't want to push yourself so hard that you injure yourself.
Yeah. Don't want to overdo it and go past the capacity of those self-repair mechanisms. And so we do see that kind of U-shaped or J-shaped curve with respect to volume of exercise and its effects on mortality. And so you're saying the same thing applies to sunlight. It's not too little, not too much. And that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone, is going to vary enormously depending on your skin type and where in the world you live. And just going back to what you were saying before about public health authorities wanting to put out a nice, consistent, simple message that applies to the masses. Well, the masses are not homogenous. The masses, both in the US and here in Australia, we have people from all over the world. We're a nation of immigrants, just like the US is. And increasingly in the last couple of decades, we've been getting more and more darker skinned people. So that kind of Anglo, Celtic, Irish, very pale skinned, a lot of redheads, freckly people. There's fewer and fewer of those in the population, more people who've come from South Asia, the Middle East, and their skin types are just completely different. They're actually way better adapted to this environment than we of British stock are. So, and then Japan. Go ahead.
Part of that is that they, if you have darker skin, you need more sunlight to be healthy, and the Australian authorities actually, because for that exact thing you're talking about, they revamped their public recommendations a couple of years ago to get away from that one-size-fits-all recommendation. And they were the first country to break it into 3 categories: one for very fair-skinned people, one for dark-skinned people, and one for people in between, with different recommendations for each. And it was a really progressive move on Australia's part to do that. I think they got.
I've got to say, it has not been widely disseminated. So I know that this policy was developed. It's not penetrating.
Right.
Yeah,
And they got a lot of resistance from doctors on it because it was complicated, right? You couldn't just tell people, here's what you should do. And so what if you're telling people, well, depending on who you are, like what's going on in your life, what you're eating, where you are, and what time of year it is, all those things are going to change the amount of sunlight you probably should be looking for. That's complicated. So that it doesn't work.
Which my answer is there's an app for that.
Well, there's a book for that, right? Like I feel like if for people who read books, it's no problem to deal with those nuances. For people who go by Instagram, then it gets hard to like tell people what to do.
Okay, that's very true. That is very true. Sadly true. I just realized there's a question that I wanted to ask you before on the melanoma thing, which I'll just jump back there. Sorry for skipping around. Is there any evidence that sunscreen use prevents melanoma?
So right now there is very weak evidence, and that's another thing that surprises people. Most of the studies that have been done, the vast majority have not found that sunscreen prevents melanoma. Now, there's an asterisk in that. There was one quite good study that was done in Australia, in Nambour. Am I pronouncing that right? Nambour?
You are. It's not far from me, actually, Nambour. Yeah.
This is the one famous study that was started about 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago. I think some of the research, the study was done in the 90s, and then they tracked the people for quite a number of years after that. So they took about 1,600 people, give or take, and 800 of them were told to do whatever they normally do for sunscreen. And the other 800 were given a SPF 16 broadband sunscreen, which at the time was like state of the art, and told to use it every day, like guided on how to use it. And there was they were followed, and it was confirmed that they were using it on a daily basis. And over the 15 years of follow-up or whatever, 11 of the good sunscreen daily users got melanoma, and 22 of the do whatever you normally do group got melanoma. So that's 50% fewer in the group that was getting the high quality sunscreen and using it on a daily basis. So that was a big deal. It's still like 11, those aren't huge numbers, and it was barely statistically significant. So like it's hard to say that was a big enough difference to definitely not have been due to just randomness. But it was, it was a 50% reduction. So that is, to this day, the study that every single doctor and dermatologist cites for proof that sunscreen use can prevent melanoma. But it's big evidence. Not a huge number of people. Not enough people get melanoma, period, to make it very statistically significant.
You need huge population sizes to really get something that was robust.
Right. And there hasn't been any other large scale studies. And even this one, it was not comparing sunscreen use to no sunscreen use, because you can't do that. You can't tell, it would be unethical if you think that sun causes skin cancer to tell half of your subjects to just go out in the sun without anything. So all they can do is tell. So the group that was the control group, most of them, about 2/3 of them, were using sunscreen at least part of the time, and they're using whatever the sunscreens of the day in the 1990s were, which were probably not very good sunscreens.
And that's it. So there are so many interesting points, and that's one of them. That sunscreens back then were there are a lot of chemicals in those sunscreens that are not used now. So are we looking at an effect on melanoma incidence that was actually driven by the use of low quality sunscreens, as opposed to the group that was given the higher quality sunscreen being actually protected?
Yeah.
The other question that I have was what was the grade of melanoma? Were they just superficial melanomas? Were they malignant? And also, I mean, I don't know if you saw a paper that was published a couple of years ago in JAMA. I actually wrote about it when was it now? 2023. Yeah. And it was a cross-sectional ecological study of 727 US counties. They found that melanoma incidence was weakly or unexpectedly negatively correlated with proxies for UV radiation exposure. So more UV radiation, less melanoma. Melanoma incidence was more strongly and consistently positively associated with proxies for diagnostic scrutiny. Counties with no dermatologists and shortages of primary care physicians had the lowest incidence, while counties amply supplied with both had the highest. So in other words, the more dermatologists you have, the more melanoma you have.
Yes, exactly. And that's the greatest correlation with melanoma is how much you're looking for, how many dermatologists there are in your county. That correlates better than sun exposure with melanoma.
And I've got to say, the number of skincare of like skin cancer clinics per square kilometre in Queensland is unbelievable. It's a major industry finding skin cancer.
Yeah. It is, and there's wide agreement of even within the field that it's being overdiagnosed. Like everyone knows that. You can't tell what's a melanoma and what's not, and what's just a mole, like until it becomes invasive, and then you know it's invasive melanoma, and then it's too late. So people are surprised that there's no like diagnosis you can do of a mole ahead of time to know whether it's going to be a melanoma or not. So what has happened over the years is that doctors have become much more aggressive at just calling anything a melanoma and taking it off, and you can understand why. That's that's the safe way to go.
You don't want to miss that like 1 in 1,000 or whatever it is that is actually seriously lethal.
Exactly. And if you do miss it, you're going to have a lawsuit on your hands. So totally. The whole system is incentivized to call every mole a melanoma pretty much and remove them. And by doing so, you're definitely going to catch a few that you might not. But so the estimates I've seen are that probably 85% of those what's called like stage 0 melanomas or melanoma in situ, like they're little tiny ones that are just getting started. Probably most of those would not end up being real melanomas, but they get taken off anyway. So, but then you see numbers of melanoma incidents like going sky high and everyone panics. But then if you look at melanoma deaths, they're actually going down.
So that uncoupling of incidence and death rate is like it's the cardinal sign of overdiagnosis.
Exactly.
And sure, I mean, there are going to be people whose lives are saved by that, but then overdiagnosis leads to a whole lot of overtreatment. And as we've been discussing previously, it also leads to a culture in which people are afraid to get any exposure to this source of, as you put it before, and I love the framing of it, of a nutrient, a multi-spectrum nutrient, which if they had a sensible amount of exposure for their skin type and their latitude and the season and all those other complicating factors, if they had that sensible amount of exposure, they would have a lower risk of all these other horrific, nasty diseases.
Yeah, and it's kind of like shark attacks in a way, right? Like shark attacks get a lot more attention than the numbers really bear out. But once you have it in your head, it's hard to enjoy, like going in the water if you're thinking.
We're all so Jaws.
So everybody stays out of the water, and if you tell people, "Oh, don't worry about it," the shark. Everyone should go in the water, and every now and then somebody gets bitten by a shark. Like if you really want to keep anyone from getting bitten by a shark, sure, tell everyone to not go in the water, or you can say everyone should go in the water, have fun. A couple of you might get bitten.
Yes. It's kind of like, oh, would you like to do something about the horrific number of people who die every year in motor vehicle accidents? Well, stop driving. But it's not an acceptable solution for the vast majority of people, and would actually lead to significant loss of life because, like, how are people going to get food? How are they going to get to the hospital when their loved one's having a heart attack? Anyway, it just gets silly, doesn't it? Yeah. So the notion that light, that specifically sunlight, is a nutrient segues nicely into this conflation, which I've been frustrated with and trying to ring the bell on for years. This conflation of sunlight with vitamin D. And as you know, I wrote a dirty, great long series about this and spent way too many hours reading way too many papers about vitamin D.
This is my friend, Cabin. Say hi to
Australia.
It's morning here.
They knew
Yeah. So vitamin D and sunlight.
Yeah, I think you know more about this than I do. I mean, I know a lot, but you really know a lot.
Well, I really dug into it because look, it's a fascinating story. And once again, so the standard dermatologist line, and I'm sure the standard GP line in this country, no doubt in yours, throughout most of the world, is cover up, wear clothes, wear a hat, use sunscreen every day, and just take a vitamin D supplement. All right? Why is that bad advice?
Yeah, so that seemed like it was going to make sense back when we assumed that vitamin D taken orally would act in the body exactly the same as vitamin D generated in the skin by sunlight. And also when we assumed that all the huge reductions in disease that we were seeing in people that had higher levels naturally of vitamin D was because of that vitamin D and not something else that sunlight was doing. So the more sun you get, the higher your vitamin D level will be. And so doctors noticed that people with higher levels of vitamin D had lower rates of pretty much every disease you can think of. And starting in the 1980s, we just assumed that it must be the D that was doing it because, as you've written about, we have receptors for vitamin D in pretty much every cell in the body. It clearly is used for many different tasks in the body. So doctors didn't want people getting sunlight. They knew that would cause vitamin D deficiency. They knew people who are vitamin D deficient tended to be very unhealthy. So it was a classic reductionist solution. Oh, well, just take the D pill and you'll be good as new, if not better. But then the way we find out if that's true in science is you do randomized clinical trials where you give half the people D pills and half the people placebos, and just to make sure that raising everyone's D level artificially will improve all these conditions. And what we found in test after test after test was that it didn't. Like raising vitamin D through pills pretty much had zero impact on disease, and slightly might have improved a few things, but also might have actually made a few things worse too. Yes.
Actually, say more about that. What are some of the conditions that could be made worse by vitamin D supplementation?
I'm going to kick that over to you because I really think you're the one who has really nailed that one down.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is a fascinating interaction between vitamin D and autoimmunity, and it's one of those Goldilocks zone stories, where not only is it a question of how much of this thing do you have circulating, because there's such intense modulation of the immune system by, well, when we're talking about vitamin D, what we're really talking about here is calcitriol, that hormone form that vitamin D is eventually kind of turned into, you might say. And yeah, it turns out that too much is just as bad as too little, because you lose that fine-tuned regulation of immune function.
Right. And I think that, like, people think vitamin D is like more is better, right? Like it's like a magical elixir where of course you want more, but it's a signaling molecule. It's the body is using it to send messages. Cells are using it to send messages to each other. So do you really need more of a signaling molecule? I mean, I know it does other things too. It can work as an anti-inflammatory, and it can even actually it can work as an antioxidant in the skin to counteract sunlight. My guess is that's why it evolved hundreds of millions of years ago. Is single-celled organisms were making it purposefully when they got sunlight to counteract the radiation, and then organisms started repurposing it for lots of other things, probably.
Yeah, that's a really, really fascinating element of evolution. And I mean, the thing is, when you're making vitamin D as a result of sunlight exposure, there's a natural shutoff mechanism whereby you get to a certain level, and then the body actually shunts the active vitamin D back into the inactive form to prevent more of it from being accumulated. So you don't have that natural shutoff when you're taking the stuff orally, let alone all the other differences. But then sunlight is vitamin D synthesis is stimulated by ultraviolet B radiation, but sunlight is so much more than UVB. I mean, it's a whole spectrum. So when we talk about it as being a nutrient, it's kind of like the B complex, right? You've got B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, folate, B12, and all these other kind of hangers on in the B complex. And you don't want to just take a whole lot of vitamin B6, for instance, because you end up with neurological damage. You throw everything out of balance when you just take this one element of it. So talk about what some of the other wavelengths in that spectrum do.
Sure. But, actually, before that, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned how vitamin D, the body naturally, when it has what it wants, the system pivots, and it instead of making vitamin D out of cholesterol molecules with sunlight, we start making other things. Have you come across any papers by Andrei Slominski? He's at the University of Alabama. He's worked a lot with Michael Hollick. Actually, so he has published a series of fascinating papers that look at those other compounds that the skin makes beyond vitamin D, and he's documented about 18 different metabolites.
Yes, I don't think I've read any of his papers, although I might have. His name doesn't stand out, but yeah, all of these other metabolites that make up this kind of family of compounds.
Yeah. And I think that some of those are going to end up playing like vitamin D-like roles in the body, but they're all slightly different, maybe. Like especially ones like lumisterol and tachysterol. I think they're going to have a lot of biological impact, just like vitamin D does. And it's going to turn out, once again, we got it way too simple. The things we thought D did were probably being accomplished by this whole family of D-like.
An entire family of related compounds.
Yeah, and they probably do slightly different things. So, which would again explain why, if you're taking a pill that's just, pre-D, then you're not going to have the same effect.
You're not going to see this broad spectrum of health effects, not at all. There's no chance of it. Yeah.
But back to your question about the other wavelengths. Yeah. So for a while, we just thought vitamin D was the one thing sunlight did that was good for you. We now know it does a variety of other things. For one, it produces nitric oxide in the skin out of nitrates that we eat in our food. And nitric oxide is another signaling molecule used throughout the body for various purposes. But one of the big things it does is, we know it dilates blood vessels and lowers blood pressure. So it's used in a lot of heart medications. It's used in Viagra. And Richard Weller, that dermatologist in Scotland that we mentioned, has done some very good experiments where he showed that shining a UVA light on people's skin produces nitric oxide, which then disseminates into the blood vessels and lowers blood pressure by a few points, which is not huge. But if you're getting that all the time, you're in the sunlight, that's going to be enough to prevent millions of deaths from heart attack and stroke every year.
Yeah, and nitric oxide, as well as being a vasodilator, it also reduces the adherence of oxidized cholesterol to blood vessel walls. It basically makes the blood less sticky. So it's an anti-atherogenic agent, as well as this blood pressure lowering effect. It's powerful stuff. And yeah, I mean, just to think that you make nitric oxide just by going outside, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
And it's not just UVA. Like he used UVA for his experiments, but UVB also does it. Blue light also does it to a lesser extent. Blue light doesn't have as much energy as UVA, but blue light also will produce some nitric oxide. And even infrared, which is the gentlest of the spectrum, also seems to generate very small amounts of nitric oxide. So yeah, when photons enter the body, they do a lot of different things, and we're still learning about I think we've probably just scratched the surface on that. I think it's going to turn out to have a lot of other impacts. But infrared in particular is one that's getting a lot of attention right now. And it's a really fascinating one to me because most of the other wavelengths barely make it into the body at all. The UVA, UVB, blue light, they're really limited to the skin. Red light goes a little bit beyond the skin, but infrared, because of its wavelength, isn't absorbed by any of those molecules very much. So it passes right through the skin and right through flesh, the way that visible light passes through glass, pretty much. And then once it gets inside, it actually scatters for a while and bounces around until it hits a molecule that is vibrating at the right frequency to absorb that infrared light. And that can actually, so it can bounce around, 100 times before it actually gets absorbed. And there's been some really interesting mechanistic studies done on infrared light, which show that because it can penetrate so well and bounce around, that virtually every cell in the body is eventually going to be absorbing some of these infrared photons. And the molecules that are particularly good at absorbing them are found in our mitochondria. And so there's starting to be studies coming out now that show that you shine infrared light on people, and sunlight, we should say that sunlight is about 50% of the spectrum is infrared.
Yep.
Most of the rest is visible, and then just a few percent is UV. But infrared, there's a ton of infrared molecules, infrared photons coming out of the sun, and they are entering our body anytime we're outside, and they're getting absorbed by all of our mitochondria. And these studies that are coming out show that the mitochondria work just a little bit better when they get that infrared light. They produce a little bit more energy, and they generate a little bit less free radicals, the reactive oxygen.
Yes.
And the really interesting thing about infrared is that our new LED light bulbs that we use for indoor lighting, the reason they're so efficient, the reason they use so little electricity is because they don't produce any infrared. They only produce visible light. So when we're outdoors, we're getting absolutely showered in infrared photons, absorbing them in our entire bodies. And when we're indoors, we're getting almost none.
Yeah. And so one of the factoids in your book was that the average American is getting less than 1 hour sun exposure a day.
Yeah.
I think that would be true for a lot of Australians as well. And so all day, every day, people are sitting inside in a really artificial light environment, and then they're barely going outside to get those infrared rays. Yeah. And I guess, have you ever read Health and Light, John Ott's book, Health and Light?
Oh, I'm so jealous. You have a real copy of it. I just have a PDF.
It is precious to me. Yeah, I got this, I don't know, 30 years ago or something.
I've wanted to write about Ott, just like a separate article just about John Ott's work.
Oh, he deserves it. What an incredible mind. Just one of those natural born scientists who I don't think he had any formal training. He just had the mind of a scientist. Yeah.
For sure.
Interesting character.
Yeah. So for people who are watching, he was the guy who did the Dancing Flower movies for Walt Disney back.
Walt Disney, the Fantasia sequence, which I remember seeing as a kid, and it just awed me. It was astonishing.
Yeah. And so as he was like doing that stop motion stuff, and watching plants respond to it, he got his microscopes, and he started noticing how individual cells of living things responded clearly and strongly and consistently to light, and to different amounts of light. They responded differently, and to
different wavelengths of light.
Exactly. That sent him down a whole rabbit hole, and he got quite obsessed for the rest of his career, and started a whole institute to explore light and health. And he was so ahead of his time that really nobody picked up on it. He published a couple books, but the scientific community never really gave him his due.
Yes. it's a sad story that's been repeated so many times. So, okay. Thanks for being so generous with your time. I promised I wouldn't steal more than an hour for you, especially since you're staying in this wonderful cabin. So, what would your message be to Australians? Right. So we live in this very sun-drenched continent. Well, apart from Tasmania, they're a bit sun-deprived a lot of the year. One of the things that I went looking for these stats on melanoma in Australia last night, and interestingly, the second, in terms of our states, the highest incidence of melanoma is in Queensland, but the second highest is in Tasmania, which is actually very light deprived for half the year anyway.
Well, all right. So that makes me think of, so Australia and New Zealand have by far the highest rates, but then the next highest rates are all the Scandinavian countries. So it's kind of that same dynamic. So, and maybe the paler your skin, the more at risk you are. So if you have pale skin and then you go on vacation to very sunny places, that's your recipe for melanoma right there. It's not the burn. It's the burn. It's skin that is not ready. That, again, back to hormesis, skin that has not been training. So I wonder, this is just a guess on my part, like with Scandinavia, my assumption has been that they all go toward the equator on vacation because they're so sun deprived, they're desperate.
Yeah, to Spain or Greece, yeah.
but pale skin that you're then lying out on a beach for 8 hours, that's what is going to give you melanoma. So I wonder if Tasmania has something like that going on. Do they, like, maybe they're coming up to Queensland in the spring?
Possibly, like going up to Port Douglas in the middle of winter. And there are other factors too. I mean, there are much higher rates of poverty in Tasmania.
Yeah.
There's higher smoking rates. Unfortunately, Tasmania has higher rates of all sorts of diseases like diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And so just going back to what we were talking about before about there being dietary factors at play with melanoma too, I wonder if that has something to do with it as well. Anyway, so
even sunburn is affected by your diet. Like if you have a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, you're less likely to burn, which is really interesting to me.
100% true, because you're actually consuming plant sunscreen. I mean, all these carotenoids that plants make, because they can't go inside if it's too hot, so they have to make something to defend themselves against UV. And then we eat that stuff, and it ends up in the skin. And I'm fortunate enough to have a skin type where I can actually tan.
Right.
So yeah. But having said that, again, as a kid, I got quite a few blistering burns in my time of totally ignoring public health advice. So don't try this at home, folks. Yeah. So the advice then is, okay, number one, the sun is your friend. Don't.
For Australia in particular, I think like the sun is more than UV. I think is a good thing to think about in Australia, because you all get all the UV you need in most of Australia throughout the year. But there's a lot more going on than that. So don't forget to get out in the sun in the parts of the day that aren't high in UV, because those rays count too. Those wavelengths are going to give you a lot of other good stuff, both for circadian rhythms and for some of the other stuff we've talked about today.
Yeah, that dose of sunlight first thing in the morning, like hop out of bed, get outside, get some full spectrum sunlight exposure. Yeah. And in terms of building up that, I like that description, solar callus. I get it. It has some negative. Has some negative connotations, but whatever. So, build up your exposure gently, slowly over time. Like as we're going into winter now, of course, but as people, as we get to the other end of the year and we're coming out of the darker, cooler times, rather than going on that holiday to Bali, Australians love to do that, like in the middle of winter. Oh, let's go to Bali, right? Let's lie on the beach and get absolutely fried. So bad idea. Don't do this.
Trouble. Yeah. like the experts I've talked to, if I tried to pin them down on a recommendation, they would all say, well, just don't burn, and just don't even get close to burning. So don't sweat the little small doses here and there. That was their advice.
Yes, yeah, terrific. And in fact, accumulating little doses of sunlight throughout the day, just popping outside for a few minutes at a time to kind of sample the different wavelengths of light that are occurring there, allowing that to come into your eyes without sunscreen, without sunglasses, I should say. Now, whole different story if you are out for hours at a stretch, or you're out boating, or you're out skiing, or something like that, or you're at higher altitude, which we don't really have a lot of in Australia. It's a very, very flat place.
Sunscreen, or even better, probably hat and shirt.
Yeah, totally. So do all that, but yeah, don't be afraid of the sun. It's got a lot of benefits that have been overlooked in this oversimplified public health messaging that we've had for almost all of my adult life, and actually most of my life. Yeah. Okay, so once again, your book is available for pre-order, and here it is, In Defense of Sunlight, The Surprising Science of Sun Exposure. Fabulous book. I really do encourage people to go and pre-order this. And any last words that you had to say?
So thank you so much for having me, and for being so smart on this topic. I'm really impressed by all your deep research that you've done.
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited by that. It's a fascinating subject. Oh, sorry. I really shouldn't throw this at the end, but I meant to mention this, and I've just realized I've forgotten. Endorphin release when sunlight hits your skin. I mean, there's a reason we feel so good when we go outside.
This is well documented. When sun hits skin, it triggers a release of endorphins in the brain that, opiates basically. So we do get a little hooked on it. It feels really good to us, but evolution didn't do that by accident.
Yeah, that's such a good point. There are influences that hijack that those brain chemical circuitries. So if you think of what cocaine does to hijack natural circuits, so it's not that everything that feels good is good, but pretty much everything that's natural that feels good, it is good.
I think that's the way to think of it. Yeah.
It's good. You can trust it. Trust the sunlight. Trust the way you feel when you go outside, and just don't spend too long, especially if you live in Australia and are fair-skinned. Thank you so much for your time, Rowan. It's been such a treat speaking to you, and I look forward to a lot of people getting your book and sending me feedback about what it's done for them and their lives.
Yeah, so let's keep the conversation going.
Terrific. Okay, thanks again.
You bet. Take care.